one more video for now on this subject. So I was looking at some old maps of America and the world and of California, and there's a subject called the island of California, which is considered a long-held Spanish misconception dating back to the 16th century, and it's because the Baja coast of California goes up to just below Mexico's California borderline, and after that um, becomes desert. The conception is that they didn't know any better somehow, but there's somehow enough evidence to say that there was a major series of earthquakes and changes. I think one of the examples is the coastline keeps continuing in some of these maps, and they have names for cities. Back then in these maps, and this goes into the late 1790s until the changeover when the 1811 comet and earthquakes become a completely different continent, and then you start seeing a changeover. I'm going to go back to this guy at some point because you should know that Mercator is pretty interesting. I think he might have something to do with Tartarians. You know, he's got the symbol and the German, Bavarian, Belgian, Flanders. Like they all question who gets him, and but he was friends with John Dee and did some occult stuff, but also worked on flat Earth maps and talked about a place called Frisland, which we'll get back to in a second. So anyway, if you look at this map of California, you can see where the Colorado River in the old map meets, right? The Colorado River ends up just at the tip here. And then you've got all of this dry area. There's water, there's green that's been piped in, but you can see this sort of pushing down, right? There's sort of a pushing down and filling in to this area, and it fills in over Nevada, right? And you can see where the lakes are. You can see that same line that goes there. So you can see there was water here. You know, this was some sort of a longer path, and so it's interesting that you've got this story that really goes on right until the 1830s, I guess, 1820s, and all of a sudden you've got the Mormon battalion, which comes through the Spanish-American War. And I remember as a kid hearing something funny about the Spanish-American War, which was that the newspapers fabricated the war with this famous quote, like, "Never mind who's fighting, you give me the papers and I'll make the war," I think it was, or like, you know, you buy the papers or you sell the papers and I'll sell the war, something to that effect. And the Mormons, who were led by Brigham Young after the Mormon Wars, and the Mormon Wars are already a crazy thing, right? You've got these, at the time, polygamists working for a guy named Joseph Smith, Joseph Smith Jupiter. He had this talisman in his pocket when he died, which is a pretty cool little thing, and it's a Jupiter talisman. You see the Jupiter symbol with the geometric display of gematria from Hebrew and numerological values ending on a 13. So, you know, the Mormons are already an interesting bunch, but led by Brigham Young, they were able to take huge amounts of land in the West in exchange for leaving Missouri and Illinois, because Illinois had some serious problems with them. But if you follow their path into San Diego, they go around, right, this crazy thing, which is the desert, obviously, but there's also, you know, at the time, supposedly Carson City, and there's, you know, eventually Vegas. Like, these are all in the middle of nowhere at this point. So they go down and they're following the Colorado River, and they go around and they take Reno to Tahoe down to the coast. And then there's also from Nebraska this path. So it kind of defines the general borderline, because at this point there's enough people living in this area that are speaking Spanish, speaking German. Who's to say this is what country? So the other interesting thing about the Mormons is their ability to build. I mean, they're stonemasons in their own right, not just in the esoteric sense. They are known for that. But what's fantastic is, you look at these pictures and you've got all of these quarried stones and these guys who are sober as, as metaphorically possible. And there's this giant dome that is erected, and there's even evidence of them erecting these buildings, or at least modifying them or fixing them, maybe if they've fallen down. But you'll start to notice there's basements, and God forbid saying a Mormon, a Latter-day Saint, could ever lie, right? But I mean, I definitely believe that they've been lied to, and that they would probably believe it, because why would they lie, about certain things? And maybe it's not to say that they didn't erect all of these giant buildings in Salt Lake City that match this certain decor of the steampunk Tartarian era. But you gotta wonder, because the other thing that Mormons are renowned for, besides their buildings and their underpants, is that they're also, in being benevolent, good people, is that they also have these crazy basements underneath their buildings. And so some of these temples are 7 stories deeper or whatever, and that goes really well in with this idea that all of these places, gosh, I'm skipping ahead too far, sorry, all of these places, here we go, are star fort like structures, some of them hidden Bastille style star fort structures that are hidden. I was going to go back to this page. I guess that's a worthwhile thing. Is what lies beneath Salt Lake City. 1911, 21-year-old Prussian gained access to the temple and took pictures of the interior. 1889, the first mentions by John Nuttall. 1889, so right after 1881, and you start seeing these tunnels, right? And they're metal tunnels with, or all kinds of piping, and they're non-trivial systems of hydraulic, and heating and air that are running through these systems too, that nobody completely understands because they're technically secret, but they're not that big of a secret. It's just that, interesting. Dragon. Anyway, so look at them digging out Salt Lake City. When I say digging out Salt Lake City, I mean, like, look at them digging out Salt Lake City. And then, yeah, we'll get back to Bastille bases, because the star forts, you think about 1593 bastion forts, the Italian trace, kind of popular in mid-century Italy, but really you think about the Spanish Hapsberg Empire. Let's look at that really quickly. Spanish Hapsberg. Sorry, I've got this Dvorak keyword, so I type, mix up my letters. Habsburg, Spain, real big place, very Germanic, control of the Dutch, King Ferdinand and Isabella. I mean, look at that long face, right? Like, these are very, very interesting people, because when we think of Spain, for some reason we think of the Moors and the Moroccans. I think Arabs, black-haired. Maybe in America we think of black hair because of Latin America and from Mexico, but think red hair, think tall, think these Germanic people that controlled the Huguenots in Holland, and you start to see where these fortifications come from and their practicality, right? Because you can, for military strategy, you can defend yourself from any angle relatively reasonably. There's probably more to it than that in terms of harmonic balance, obviously. I mean, if you think about John Dee, but maybe you shouldn't. Anyway, here's more of the star forts, which are fascinating because they have sort of cog-like systems that react to interact with each other. See the no dead zone. So in between, if you imagine using a Canon or light, if you had two lenses of light, they would Fresnel and have a magic zone. There'd be no shadow zone, or there'd be no emptiness for the kill zone. Not only do the Starforged, they're always in a golden ratio, like portal that is ovular, and I kind of think the more I've seen, I want to get some more pictures to show that there's a correlation with the constellation, the pyramidal constellation, with Orion and the Pleiades. So, and then here's a Mormon temple, right? Like, so in case you're looking for stars or star forts, any angle, right? I mean, say what you want. The Latter-day Saints, they're interesting, very interesting people, and I don't know, very, very fascinated by their buildings and their. I mean, these days you have to wonder. I mean, the more you hear about how much history is not true, the more bizarre it becomes, and the less bizarre things like Latter-day Saints history of Jesus, Israeli in the Western Hemisphere in South America and North America. That sounds less and less bizarre. Here's a obscured star. Again, around this shape, there's an oval that's then has a circle, with a line. Then we get into the maps. So we were talking earlier about how California was an island, and I will explain why I think that that's not as wrong as it sounds, and that this continued on and dried up, but very quickly, which is why it was on maps up until this point. So the next thing is you look at the Nord. So I think that's another interesting Nordic, the Nordic Americas. Above the Nordic Americas, you see Greenland, and then you see Britain, and then you start to look a little closer, and in the middle maps there's a conflict where there's a place called Frisland, and it's a little blob, but whatever. And then you start, it's like, but you look around and you start seeing it everywhere. You're like, well, what the heck? And it's not like they don't have, these are cities and mountains, okay? So let's go a little smaller again. These maps, which are done, in the 15, 16, into the 17th century, or 16th century, I think, 15th, 16th century, show Frisland as being detailed with cities, with locations, with a bay. You start to notice there's this island here, and there's a bay. There is two larger sections. It kind of looks, right? It kind of looks like where my palm's at. You guys know what I'm talking about? It kind of looks like England, right? And Ireland. Now, if you know your history, they say Friesland was a hoax because, you see Iceland, you see like that. So, but Friesland by 1827 takes. Think about these pictures, and then the cities, and then the names of these cities. Let me go back for a second to those names again. Godme, Alcibar, Campa, Cabaru, Raru, Diria. Okay. These are kinds of maybe like Gaelic, Etruscan sounding names, though we're not completely familiar with the Saxon sounding names. Look then at Scotia and Anglica, right? Now look at Wales, when it was called Wales, as this area, and Scotland as this area, because on that smaller map it looks a little bit less stretched out because you've got the mountains here and the mountains there. There's still a chunk there, but it looks like maps, there's a conflict in history because they know there's names for things that are being described by different groups. So they know that there are the primal Britons in the mountains and in the coasts. They also know across the east there's the Caesarian states underneath the Scottish state, which is Valentine, the Scottish valiant state, right? So you start to see how they get squished out, and eventually the maps superimpose on top of each other. And when that happens, Frisland disappears. And when Frisland disappears, so do the names, but not the geography. And you start to pick up. So the next thing is like, is California really, was it really washed away? So, or, by a mudslide, was it really buried? So you look at California was, originally Kali, like Kali Ma Shakti, which probably shouldn't even say it loud. California was named literally after Kali, which is from the Kali Yuga, the goddess, the sex goddess of destruction, with the necklace of skulls. You might have seen her around. And they brought in people telling them that it was this island paradise that had castles and gold the size of houses. And I had family told that when they came to California, they would have to pay someone to shovel their wheelbarrow full of gold for them because there'd just be so much gold to lug around. So they got all these guys to show up, and you'll notice they're not digging like for gold. They're just digging for dirt that they put into these systems of canals, and then they would bring the water through these canals. Often they have pictures of these guys saying, yeah, come mine for gold, but that's only some of the story, because a lot of what they did was they got them on these huge hoses. I mean, these are the biggest garden hoses in the world. I've seen them, and this is a de-exaggeration. I mean, maybe I was in like 4th grade when we went on the trip to see California in history, but these things are huge. Some of them are definitely 20 feet, and you got to wonder, how would you dig some of this mud out after a mud flood? And you start to see, like, well, what did they do right after the mud flood? They got people to go to Nevada for silver, and they got people to go to California for gold. And the people who went there seldom struck rich, ended up working for these big conglomerates, ended up working in mining, quarrying, which then took them into drilling for oils and things like that. But the technology for these hydroelectric things, they're not like haphazard. I mean, these are systems that they understand well enough. So they've built them, granted these are out of wood, but you can see this is very much like the systems of South America. So it could be this is the point when they're starting to rediscover and try to test and learn how to use these things. And the Tartarian aqueduct system might have actually been damaged in some ways, and then they were able to repair it if they figured out how to utilize it using the information they had. So you got to wonder, how much strength does this hose have? Well, I mean, these areas are completely, this is one guy in a lot of these places taking out a level, taking out a level, taking out a level. He's got, this looks like the man with the plan, but I could be wrong. These guys, though, a little dirtier, you know what I'm saying? And then what are they doing? They're taking out a wall of mud, and then you look underneath it, and this is maybe but this is the pipe for the water. Well, why is it going the other direction? But I don't know, it's fine. I'm just saying, you don't want to kink a pipe like that. So this is maybe just laid pipe. It seems like it's underwater and they're undigging something. Obviously, that's what I want you to believe. Anyway, by looking at these pictures, I have definitely a bias when I'm looking at these pictures, because now that I've seen these things from the perspective of growing up in California, it makes a lot more sense that this is not for the reason that they were told, because a lot of these guys were kind of simple in their hard work. They were good at what they did, and they ended up being explained, oh, well, this is why you do this, well, you can't do that, everybody knows that, and then they go, oh, okay, and so they just started going along with it. But apparently, like, people used to surf the redwood trees that were cut down on these aqueducts, and that's partially where Northern Californian surfing culture came. Before Polynesia was the Hawaiian Islands concocted the culture in the 19th century as well to turn Hawaii into a tourist island, which I will have an episode about Hawaii at some point because I think it's an important thing. But you can look into the Hawaiian Postal Agreement, which is the beginning of when the United States negotiated, to have, I think, it was like tens of millions of dollars for an annual, 1885, they had an agreement, and then they would send millions of dollars in order to send mail back and forth to get from here to here, right? So, then you start thinking, well, what can you do with this excavation project, right? Like, if you can get these guys to start digging for stuff, you can turn, you tell them it's for gold, right? They will eventually uncover, whatever you want, and it's likely that there was a lot of temples in California. We do know that in the Grand Canyon, they've found things which they like to say are this primitive structure of Anasazi, but you've seen the Anasazi Star Fortress. If you haven't, look into it. Just type in Star Fortress and start checking out Star Fortresses. But a lot of people think the Grand Canyon was actually done somehow synthetically, the same way as this excavation through hydraulics. And it seems, I don't want to say it seems unbelievable, because it doesn't. It seems like totally believable, like, considering how technology works. And also seems more believable than the story that this was done naturally for a number of reasons. I see these levels, and I think also these are some structures around the Grand Canyon. But this is the one that really gets me, is the Isis Temple, obviously, because you got a point on top of a rock with these, like, unbelievable star-shaped extrusions that are flat, walkable catwalks that you could just, come on. Come on, guys. Come on. So, maybe, but so if that's not created by physics one way, it's created by physics another. Let's put it that way. But this harmonic structure seems a little synthesized. And after 10,000 years, the last thing that we'll probably be able to see is the Hoover Dam, right? I saw a video where someone was mentioning that the Hoover Dam is visible like in 10,000 years because it's stone, whereas assuming it's not buried, whereas other structures will be fully dilapidated over like the next 6,000 to 8,000 years or less, or 1,000 years. There'll be not very many things left. But if you think of this idea that this supposed Ice Age time, whenever that may be, that this is when that's from, then it starts to make sense that there's a remnant. All right, well, that everything I wanted to cover for now. So I think I'll let you guys go. Thanks a lot.